I'm now going to continue my review of Danica McKellar's book, Math Doesn't Suck, with a discussion of periodicals. And if you guys do not know what a periodical is, go ahead and look it up. I am running a live stream, as I have mentioned before, in some of my other videos on this topic. And I have my laptop right here. I actually have written out notes this time. And I actually have my dry erase marker this time. The last time I had illustrations that I made in Microsoft Paint. This time I'm going to just use my dry erase marker because the subject matter is a lot simpler. Okay, so when I was young, periodicals were all the rage. Oh man, you're talking to a guy who actually had a subscription not only to Logic Problems but also to Byte Magazine. Now Byte Magazine no longer exists, and you can still get Logic Problems, no question about that. Alright, but times have changed, and I know you published this book in 2008. I realize that, and it has now been 12 years since this book was actually released. But even back then, periodicals were not the big rage. People were still reading them to some degree, but nowadays people don't even touch them hardly at all. I mean, everything you want is on the internet. Shoot, you can get about the same amount of stuff, just have one of these. So periodicals, I mean, have you ever noticed that, I think it's Newsweek. Newsweek just doesn't exist. If you go to a magazine shop or go try to find a newspaper or magazine shop and see how well you find them, because they hardly even exist at all now. Bookstores, yeah, right. You go to a non-metropolitan area, good luck finding a bookstore. Yeah. And of course, the attention spans of young adults today is just not the same as it was when I was a young adult. I mean, I thought I had attention span problems when I was a kid. Nothing compared to today. So, I would rather use an example of buying an inexpensive smartphone than using the example of buying a periodical, because even the ones like they used to have magazines, and I know because I used to go to the bookstore and I used to buy copies of Byte Magazine before I got a full-blown subscription, and I can tell you right now they used to have things like Tiger Beat and all this other. You don't even see that anymore. So to say buying a periodical as your example in this particular chapter of your book, I'm sitting there going, who does that anymore? Especially now. That just doesn't happen. So, now I want to go through this. I don't know if I have this up here or not, but I'm going to try this. Yeah, I do. I'm going to try to illustrate this a little bit better so everybody gets this, because I tell you right now, a lot of young adults are watching me right now. So we're going to go through this. Imagine, if you will, Roman columns. Okay, and if you don't know what a Roman column is, all you have to do is go on to the internet, do a Google search of old Roman buildings, and you'll see the Roman columns. Even in the Greek times, they had Greek columns too. Okay, so the Greeks had them, then the Romans, so on and so forth. That's not the point. Imagine, if you will, a column, a Roman column full of these. These are pennies. Okay. Now, let's imagine you put a ton of these in one Roman column. Now, the next one, you also have a ton of these, but there are less of these than there are of these. And I'll tell you why. Because this dime right here is worth 10 times as much as this penny. Okay? Now imagine a third Roman column with a bunch of these in it. Okay, so as this penny is worth 10 times less than this dime, or you can say this dime is worth 10 times more than this penny, so is this dollar worth 10 times more than this dime. Okay? That's why there are not as many of these dollars as there are as these dimes. Okay, let's say you have a column full of dimes. To make the same amount of money in the third column as in the second, there would be 10 times less of these than there would be of these in the columns. Okay? So, to make it really basic, this dime is worth 10 times as much as this penny, and this dollar is worth 10 times as much as this dime. And that's how our mathematics is based. Literally. It's all about columns and what's in those columns. Okay? That's why they had the ones place, the tens place, and the hundreds place, and so on and so forth. Alright? And this is done because of our base 10 number system. We have 10 digits on our hands. Okay, now this is very, very important. Now, I want you to think of decimals like a mirror. Okay, you're doing the exact opposite, kind of what you would do with things on this side of the decimal point. Okay, as you take one step to the left, as you continue to take one step to the left, you're going to increase the value by 10. The penny worth just a certain amount, the dime worth 10 times as much, the dollar worth 10 times as much, and the $10 bill worth 10 times as much. You get the idea? Now, the opposite is true as you move the opposite end of the scale. When you're talking about moving to the right on decimal places, you start with the one that's most valuable, and then the one next to it is worth 10 times less, and the next one next to it is worth 10 times less, and so on and so forth. So the further you move to the right, you have to subtract 10 times. You're adding 10 times as you move to the left, but you're subtracting 10 times as you move to the right. It's that simple. It's like an ocean. The further you go down, the less oxygen you have. The further you go up and you go up to the oxygen, the more oxygen you have. Okay, and as you move towards the sky, you're going to have a lot of oxygen. Until, of course, you try to go to the stars, then you won't. But that's another story for another time. So, anyway, now another thing you had brought up was why would we put a 0 before a decimal? Now, I will go ahead and research that and make another video out of that, just simply because I can, and I'm going to. And I will show you the mathematical reason why they actually put a 0 before the decimal point. You also have to keep in mind one thing. Zeros at that time, when they first invented mathematics, was called the absence of value. It wasn't just called a 0, it was actually called the absence of value. Alright, they got to be real tricky. Now, you had brought up Olympic gymnastics. Well, you actually brought up the subject of gymnastics, but I'm going to bring up the subject of Olympic gymnastics because I was alive in 1980, and I actually watched the 1980 Olympics on television, which I don't know. I know you're pretty close to my age, but you're actually a little younger than I am, so it's very unlikely that you actually watched the Olympics, or even if you did, you probably didn't know what was going on, whereas I was old enough to know what was going on. Alright? So, when it comes to Olympic gymnastics, the 1980 Olympics had some big-time scandals, specifically when it came to gymnastics. Now, I'm sure you probably don't remember Nadia Comaneci, but she was involved in a scandal. It wasn't against her at all. They had given points to somebody else when they should have given it to Nadia Comaneci, and they had a big scandal about that. And I actually have a hyperlink to that scandal right down here in the comments below. Now, you talk about memorable. You read that, you'll have memorable out the wazoo. But I know you probably didn't know anything about that. Now, when it comes to the greater than symbol, and I'll show you this, forget the crocodile. Forget it. This is about Rich Avenue and Poor Street. The greater than symbol will always point to Poor Street. Okay? That's where it'll point. It'll always point to Poor Street. Now, this is opposed to the less than symbol, which I will draw here, which is pointing to Rich Avenue. That's all they have to remember. No crocodile necessary. You don't have to take a bite out of these people. Just remember Poor Street and Rich Avenue. Everybody's going to remember that. I promise you. Okay? Not everybody's been in personal contact with a crocodile, but I guarantee you they have been in contact with Rich Avenue and Poor Street. There you go. Now, I will agree with you that your moving hands technique about decimals is a good idea. I have to say that was a pretty good idea. So I'll give you that one. Now, what about adding and subtracting decimals? Well, just imagine soldiers lining up. Have you ever watched a military parade? Yeah. All you have to do is just imagine. Well, let me put it up here. It's just make sure that the decimal point is lined up like little soldiers in a line. That's all they have to do. All they have to do is memorize the military soldier lineup thing, and then they can get this. It's really that easy. So, anyway, that's... I think in your book you make it a tad more complicated than it actually has to be. But anyway, I see we have another person in our live stream. As I mentioned, I'm running a live stream right now, and whoever it is, let me know who you are, and I'll be happy to say hello. Anyway, when it comes to taxes, if you're trying to figure out taxes on a particular item, this is what you're going to do. You're going to remember the 10%, the 5%, and the 1%. These are the three numbers that are most critical when you're trying to figure out a tax on an item. Let's say you have a $10 item. Okay? And you wanted 10% of that. Okay, all you have to do is move your decimal place one to the left. So instead of $10, you just have $1. And to show you that real simply, okay, 10% of $10 is $1. Simple as that. Okay. Now, what about 1%? If you want to figure out 1% of an item, what you're going to do is, when it comes to $10, and you want to 1%, you just move the decimal place right over here. So now you have 10 cents. Okay? That's real easy so far. Now what if you want to know 5% of an item? That's kind of easy too. Let's find out 10% of an item, which of course is $1. Like that. 10% of $10 is $1. Now let's just divide it by 2. And when we do, we get 50 cents. Okay, so 5% of a $10 item is 50 cents. No, that's not right. That's not right. No, that's not right. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Sorry, that is correct. Okay, I'm right on this. Okay, so if 1% of a $10 item is 10 cents, then 5% of that item is 50 cents, and 10% of that item is $1. Okay, so let me say that one more time just to be clear. Of a $10 item, 1% is 10 cents, 5% is 50 cents, and 10% is $1. There you go. Just like that. Now you say, well, okay, what if your percent is 8%? Okay, well, you find 5% of the item and 1% of the item, take the 1% times 3 and add it to the 5%, and you got it. Okay? Let me show you how that one works. Alright, so what is 8% of $10? Well, we already got 50 cents. We already figured out 5%. Now, what's 10 cents times 3? Well, that's 30 cents. Well, 30 cents plus 50 cents is 80 cents. So, 8% of $10 is 80 cents. Simple. That's it. Okay. Now, I would personally recommend that if you are paying more than 10% sales tax on anything in a store because of your state government, I would move out of the state. I honestly would not pay more than 10% in sales taxes. That's ridiculous. But see, that's not hard at all. And what you present in your book is a little more complicated than what it actually has to be. And so there you go. All right. Now, let's talk about when you're talking about dividing decimals. You're talking about dividing decimals. Let me talk about this for a second. You are trying to show divisor, dividend, and quotient. Let me make this a lot simpler. Okay? We're going to go into the comic book section for this one. We're going to imagine the diabolical Dr. Divisor, and he wants a dividend. Now, what is a stock dividend? Well, I'm going to tell you what a stock dividend is. Let's say you are buying stock in a particular corporation. Now, that corporation actually makes profit. Now, they could reinvest that profit back into their company, or they could actually give a portion of that back to you. And for every share of stock you own in that company, you get a certain amount of a dividend. So these dividends are worth something. So let's imagine that we have, since you're wanting to use this like this, let's imagine a bank. Okay? Now here's the bank building. That's the bank building. This is the vault right here. This is the vault. Okay? Now Dr. Divisor is sitting right here, and he wants the dividend that's in the bank. Okay? He wants the money that would normally be given to the stockholders. He wants it. Well, who comes in to stop him? Why, none other than Captain Quotient. There's Captain Quotient. Now, isn't that a much more fun way to remember all this stuff? And don't tell me the kids don't read comic books, because I know they read comic books quite a bit. My gosh, I get advertisements for them all the time. Okay? Now, we have to cover one more thing before this particular episode is done. did a video a long time ago on the words numerator and denominator. There they are, numerator and denominator. Okay. Now, we're going to say that the numerator is the bank. And where are all the stock dividends stored? Well, in the bank. They're stored in the vault. Okay, this is the bank vault. The numerator is your bank vault. Now, what about the denominator? Well, the denominator is where Dr. Divisor is. Okay, he's underneath the safe. Okay, he's trying to come in on the safe from the bottom. Makes it a lot easier to remember. Now, I had somebody ask me the other day what I thought about your whole book. Up to this point, you've had some good ideas, and I had to agree with some of those good ideas, but some of them I'm like, really? I can make this a lot simpler. So, overall, I think the book's okay, but I think that you could have used a lot better ideas, and I just clearly illustrated those better ideas. So, for the person who commented to me, I honestly think that this book is, I would give it maybe a C+ or a low B. Because there are some ideas that I have come up with that are a lot better than what's in this book. But I haven't finished reading it yet, so far that's what I would give it. I would either give it a B- or C+. Because you had some decent ideas, but I think I could have done better on some things. Some things I couldn't, some things I could. So, there you go. Alright, so I wanted to thank you very much for watching this particular presentation. I will continue reviewing your book, and hopefully from what I'm saying to you, you might write a better math book. And if you want to use some of my ideas, let me know and we'll make some kind of arrangement. Alright, in the meantime, I want to thank you very much for watching this presentation. I hope you have a great evening. I will tell you more in a future video, so I'd like for you to stay tuned.